Have you noticed how everything goes quiet right before your life shifts? No signs, no reassurance, no progress, just silence. What if that silence isn't absence, but preparation? What if the universe doesn't answer because it's watching something inside you change? And what if the moment you feel most abandoned is actually the moment you're closest to a breakthrough? There is a moment almost no one talks about because it feels too confusing to explain and too uncomfortable to admit. A moment when you have done everything right, or at least everything you knew how to do, and yet the world seems to stop responding, as if your effort disappeared into a void and the signs you once relied on have gone quiet and the progress you expected never arrives. And you begin to wonder whether this silence is a warning or a punishment, or proof that you were wrong all along. And the strangest part is that the silence does not feel neutral. It feels personal. It feels intentional. It feels as though something unseen has stepped back and is watching what you will do when there is nothing left to reassure you. And this is where most people give up, not because they are weak, but because the human mind is wired to interpret silence as rejection and uncertainty as danger. And so the first question that rises is not what should I do now, but why has everything gone quiet right when I needed a sign the most? And what if the silence is not an ending but a threshold? And what if the quiet is not absence but compression? And what if the universe goes silent not to abandon you, but to remove the noise you are hiding behind? Because there is a point in every deep transformation where external feedback must disappear so that internal authority can emerge. And this is the stage that breaks most people, not because it is painful, but because it is ambiguous. And the mind hates ambiguity more than pain, because pain at least tells you something is happening. But silence offers no confirmation, no reward, no punishment, just space. And in that space, your identity begins to destabilize, because so much of who you thought you were was built on response, validation, feedback, progress, applause, even struggle. And when that disappears, you are left alone with the raw question of whether you believe in what you are doing without reinforcement. And this is the first real test of alignment, because before a breakthrough, there is always a narrowing of signals, a reduction of external stimulation, a collapse of old narratives, and psychologically, this mirrors what happens when the brain is rewiring itself. Because during neuroplastic change, old neural pathways weaken before new ones strengthen, creating a temporary void where habits feel harder, motivation drops, and meaning becomes unclear. And many mistake this for failure, when in reality, it is transition, and this is why so many people quit one step before the breakthrough. Because the silence convinces them that nothing is happening, when in truth, something foundational is reorganizing beneath awareness. And this is not mystical optimism. It is observable in biology, psychology, and human behavior, because growth does not announce itself. It rearranges first, and only later reveals its shape, and the universe does not reward desperation. It responds to coherence. And when you are still looking outward for permission, reassurance, or proof, you are not yet coherent with the next version of yourself. And so the signals stop because they were feeding the old identity and silence forces, confrontation with what remains when the noise is gone. And this is where the deeper fear emerges, not the fear of failure, but the fear that if this works, you will no longer recognize yourself or be recognized by others. Because breakthroughs require identity loss, and the psyche resists identity loss more fiercely than discomfort. And so the universe goes quiet to see whether you are willing to continue without applause, without confirmation, without guarantees. And this is the psychological corridor between wanting and becoming, and it feels empty because it must be empty. Anything that fills it would interfere with the transition, and in this phase, time distorts, days feel longer, motivation fluctuates. Memories of past mistakes surface, old doubts resurface, not because you are regressing, but because the mind is doing inventory, deciding what can come forward and what must dissolve, and people misinterpret this resurfacing as proof they are not ready, when it is actually proof that the system is cleaning itself, and silence creates pressure, and pressure reveals structure. And under that pressure, your beliefs either collapse or condense, and what condenses becomes the foundation of the breakthrough. And this is why silence is often accompanied by isolation, because relationships built on the old frequency begin to feel distant. Conversations lose resonance, and you may feel unseen, not because others changed, but because you have moved out of sync with what once reflected you. And this loneliness is not a flaw. It is a signal that your internal reference point is shifting, and without silence, you would never notice it. Because noise keeps you externally oriented and dependent, and this is why the most significant transformations in human history, personal or collective, are preceded by periods of obscurity, exile, confusion, or withdrawal, because clarity requires space, and space requires silence. And the universe removes what distracts you not out of cruelty, but necessity, because the next step cannot be taken by the person you were. And the person you are becoming cannot be guided by the same signals, and so the old signs disappear and the familiar methods stop working. And the effort that once produced results now feels ineffective, and this is deeply unsettling, but it is also precise. Because it means you are attempting to solve a new problem with an outdated self, and the silence is the boundary between those versions. And if you listen carefully, the silence is not empty. It is full of subtle cues, intuition, bodily sensations, shifts in attention. Moments of stillness that feel heavy, but not hopeless. And these cues require a different kind of listening, one that cannot be rushed or forced. And this is why impatience intensifies the discomfort, because impatience is an attempt to escape the silence rather than understand it. Overthinking? And so thoughts arise, like this is going nowhere. This was a mistake, you missed your chance. Others are moving ahead. And these thoughts feel convincing because they reduce uncertainty, but they are not truth. They are coping mechanisms. And recognizing this is crucial, because how you interpret the silence determines whether it becomes preparation or paralysis. And this is where discipline replaces motivation, because motivation relies on feedback and discipline relies on identity. And when feedback disappears, only identity remains. And if your identity is dependent on outcome, the silence will feel unbearable. But if your identity is anchored in process, values, and direction, the silence becomes tolerable, even instructive. And this is the moment where many spiritual traditions converge with psychological insight, because they all recognize that the deepest shifts occur in quiet. Not in spectacle, not in reward, but in stillness and patience and restraint. And the universe does not respond to force, it responds to readiness. And readiness is not proven by effort alone, but by steadiness under uncertainty, and silence tests steadiness. And it asks a simple but profound question: who are you when nothing responds? And most people cannot answer that without distraction. And so they abandon the path and seek noise elsewhere. And there is no shame in that, but it explains why breakthroughs are rare. Not because opportunity is scarce, but because silence is intolerable to most, and yet those who remain, those who resist the urge to interpret silence as rejection, begin to notice subtle internal shifts. Priorities realign. Energy becomes quieter, but more focused. The need to explain oneself diminishes, and this is the sign that internal authority is forming. And when internal authority forms, external validation becomes unnecessary, and paradoxically, that is when external results begin to appear. Because the system is now coherent and aligned, and this is why the silence ends suddenly, often without warning, not gradually, but abruptly. Because the shift was internal and invisible, and once it stabilizes, the external world responds quickly, and people will call it luck or timing or coincidence, without seeing the months or years of silence that preceded it. And this is why comparing timelines is destructive. Because you never see the silent phases of others, only the visible outcomes, and silence does not mean stagnation, it means incubation. And incubation requires darkness and stillness and trust. And the reason it feels unbearable is because you are being asked to trust something you cannot see. And yet every meaningful creation requires it, and the universe is not silent because it is indifferent. It is silent because it is precise, removing what would interfere with your becoming. And if you can endure this phase without abandoning yourself, without rushing into substitutes, without demanding reassurance, you cross an invisible line, and on the other side, things move quickly, not because the universe suddenly decided to reward you, but because you finally became someone who could receive what was always coming, and this reframes the silence not as punishment, but as preparation. Not as delay, but as alignment. Not as abandonment, but as refinement in the question that is not, why did the universe go silent? But can you remain present without answers long enough to become who the answer requires? And this is the quiet courage no one applauds. The courage of staying when nothing responds, the courage of continuing without signs, the courage of trusting internal direction over external noise. And this courage changes people, and when people change, their reality eventually follows, and the silence breaks not with noise, but with clarity. And when it does, you will realize it was never empty. It was working on you the entire time.